Mega Maniacs, this is Mr. MegaManFan, and you are looking at Comix Zone for the Sega Genesis, and it does what Nintendon't, because this game was never on Super Nintendo, and only eventually 7 years later came out on GBA only in Europe. But, ironically, I played it first on PC, and not in emulation as you might think. It was actually ported by Sega PC to Windows 3.1 in 1995, which was around the time I was in college, and I had a Windows PC computer, so naturally, I played the port there, and only later did I pick up this loose cartridge when I started collecting physical Sega games, but that's all I've ever had is the loose cartridge. I've never had complete inbox with instructions. I just have what you see here in this video. So let me tell you some facts about Comix Zone, as I always like to do in Genesis Does episodes. This game was released fairly late in the life of the Genesis, August 1995, and it stars Sketch Turner, a starving artist, comic book writer, whose creation accidentally comes to life and escapes his comic book when it's struck by lightning, and he wants to take over the world, but Mortis, he being the antagonist, can't do that unless Sketch dies in the comic book world, so he can be given flesh. Don't ask me why, those are just the comic book rules. So you get sent into this comic book, you have to beat up your own creations, and you have to explore the world panel for panel, as it were, as though you were actually in a comic book. In fact, you can tear the pages in some cases to escape to different panels than the order that you're suggested to progress in. As for the creation of this game, it stems from a Commodore Amiga demo in 1992 called Joe Pencil Trapped in the Comix Zone. That demo ultimately allowed its creator Peter Morawick to design this game with the help of Adrian Stevens as the programmer and Howard Drawson as the designer. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up that also allows you to pick up items and weapons and use them to traverse the levels. So there's not a singular way to solve each panel of this game. You can break objects, use items, hit enemies with your items, destroy barriers with bombs. You can even pick up a pet mouse, which you'll see here shortly, and he can help you find secrets and use switches and pick up items for you and even zap enemies with a little bolt of electricity. His name is Roadkill. Here he is, trapped in a cage. And if we hadn't taken this panel to the right where the enemy said nothing to see here, we would not have found our faithful rodent friend. Very helpful. And also, jumping on the table with his cage opened up a secret area, and you can hit the switch. Getting right to the right position to flip the switches is not always the easiest thing to do. You can see I'm struggling with it a little bit here, but once I get standing in the right position, I can flip the switch by hitting the A button, and then fall down through the trapdoor, kick these barrels out, and then progress through that sewer pipe or tunnel, whatever it might be, to the next area. But unfortunately, there's an enemy inside one of the barrels, so I've got to take it out with a few uppercuts here to get it out of the way. And that is one thing I should note. A is a different punch depending on what way you're pressing on the D-pad at the time. If you press low, it's a kick. If you press just the A button, it's a punch. If you press up, it's a high kick. And if you press to the right, you throw an uppercut. So you've got a different range of attacks. And usually for your enemies, you want to use all of the different attacks. If you just throw one, they'll eventually block it or jump over you. You kind of need to rotate through your different options in order to progress, because otherwise the enemies take a bite out of you, and you want to avoid that as much as possible because health refills are very limited. Not only that, if you die anywhere in the first chapter of this comic book, game over, man. Mortis comes to life, you lose, you don't get to restart with any of your progress. You have to get to at least the second or the third chapter to continue from where you are. The difficulty curve on this game is sort of high, but as I said, you do have items and weapons and your pet Roadkill to help you. You even have the ability to tear part of the pages and make an item out of it, a paper plane, but at a cost to your own health because you're a part of the comic book, so any damage you do by tearing the pages also does damage to you. Twisted, right? This is a very innovative game for its time. In fact, it was almost too innovative because I don't think critics really got it. The whole Marvel Cinematic Universe thing hadn't happened yet. Comic book culture had not gone mainstream pop and taken over the world as we know it now. So this just didn't quite make sense to a lot of the game reviewers and game writers of the time. But it's a classic to some of us, despite the very high difficulty level you have going in. With a lot of trial and error, you can remember where things are and when they happen and just get good at it by repetition. But not having played for a few years, I'm a little bit out of practice right now. Although I do know that you don't want to walk into these spinning blades and try to knock them out. They look destructible, and they are, but the blades will hurt you. So the real strategy here is to send Roadkill underneath it. He'll hit the switch for you to stop the spinning blade, and then you can destroy it once the blade is not moving. That's how you progress. These little things you pick up through repeated plays of Comix Zone. You learn all the little tricks as you go through. Again, very innovative game, just not a very easy game. But I believe Ryan Taylor is a fan, and I think he even suggested this in one of my previous episodes of Genesis Does. So I'm happy to do him that solid and show off a little of the gameplay using my analog Mega SG. And I do take requests such as that, so if there is a Genesis game that you want to see, and I happen to have a copy of it, loose, complete, whatever, I will play it on Genesis Does, as long as it's an exclusive to the Sega Genesis Mega Drive. And when I say exclusive, I mean during the console's lifespan. A lot of these did eventually come out later. I mentioned the Game Boy Advance version, which was exclusive to Europe, and even fans of Comix Zone were not very happy with that port. And then it came later to Wii Virtual Console in the late 2000s, 2007 as I recall. So there were other ways to play it, but Sega ported it to the PC first of all things, and I just happened to have a computer that had a Sega Genesis collection. It had Sega's, what 4 games were on there? It had Comix Zone, and I want to say Sonic CD, and I don't remember what the other 2 were, but there were 4 games on it. It was like a 4-pack of Sega games ported to Windows. And I was much better at the Windows version of Comix Zone. I guess I just had more time as a college student between classes to memorize all these patterns. And then later, when I obtained the Genesis cartridge, I had lost all of that knowledge. So practice makes perfect. I'm going to give this a few more spins off camera and then try to make more than 22% progress in my superhero meter. This is Mr. MegaManFan saying, as always, thank you for watching. See you next Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central for another episode of Genesis Does. Bye for now.